I want you to imagine, just for a second, that almost every single modern problem you face today, you know, the loneliness, the fear of failure, this constant search for meaning, what if I told you all of that was actually solved thousands of years ago?
It's a pretty bold claim to start with.
Right. But look, even though we have entirely different clothes and, vastly different technology, we are walking around with the exact same human mind.
Oh, absolutely. The exact same hardware.
Yeah. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are looking at philosophy, and not as some dusty academic subject you fell asleep in during college, but as a literal practical tool for living.
Which is how it was originally intended, by the way.
Totally. We're going to figure out what it actually is, why it's disappearing from our culture, and how all these great global traditions basically point to the exact same destination. So, okay, let's unpack this. If you look at the literal meaning of the word philosophy, you get philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom.
Right, and that distinction right there, the love of wisdom, is critical because we need to draw a really hard line between information and wisdom.
Because we have so much information now. It's wild. Like in 1998, humanity generated maybe a few exabytes of data all year. Today, we do that every few hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are completely drowning in information, but we are starving for an operating system. We conflate having access to data with the ability to actually process life.
And those are just wildly different things.
Vastly different. The sources we're analyzing today use this really great analogy. You can memorize all the nutrition facts in the world, right?
Yeah.
You can know the precise macronutrient breakdown of every vegetable on the planet.
But you can still eat complete junk food every single day.
Exactly. The data is flawless, but the execution is zero. That is just information. Or, think about the person who memorizes all those motivational quotes on social media.
Oh man, the people with Marcus Aurelius in their bios.
Right. They know the theories of resilience, but the second their boss sends them like a vaguely critical email on a Friday afternoon,
They completely melt down.
their nervous system just hijacks them. They lose their whole weekend to anxiety. They have the knowledge, but they lack the mechanism to apply it under pressure. Philosophy asks the deeper question, which is, how should a human being actually live?
It's like the operating system of your mind. Which, if we use that tech analogy, if your phone's operating system is corrupted, every app you open is going to act super weird.
It's going to crash.
Right. It freezes, it drains the battery. And in your life, your apps are your career, your relationships, your daily habits.
That is such a precise way to look at it because your core philosophy, and you have one, whether you consciously chose it or not, dictates this very rigid pipeline.
Wait, what do you mean by rigid pipeline?
Well, your beliefs shape how you interpret reality. That interpretation generates your emotional response. Your emotions dictate your actions, and your actions literally construct your future.
Okay, yeah, let's bring in that layoff example from the text because that perfectly illustrates this. Imagine two people sitting in the same office, and they both get fired on the exact same afternoon.
The exact same objective event.
Right, same data point. Person A walks out to their car, and their internal script is just running, my career is over, I'm a massive failure, I'll never recover.
And person B?
Person B walks to their car and is like, honestly, I hated this place. Now I've got severance and the forced momentum to finally change industries. Same event.
But entirely different philosophies. Person A is running a script that personalizes the external event, making it a tragedy. Person B is running a script optimized for adaptability.
It's the interpretation engine.
Exactly. This is the tragic irony of our connected age. Early humans used to look up at the stars and ask, who are we? Why do we suffer?
And today we're like, which phone has the best camera? Or how many likes did that post get?
Right. Information exploded, but wisdom stagnated.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because when you dive into the sources, you see that ancient programmer, these philosophers from all over the world, they basically solved these bugs thousands of years ago.
And they did it entirely independent of one another.
Yes. Separated by centuries, oceans, totally different languages, but they all converged on the same truths. Like, let's just rapid fire some of these. You've got Socrates in Greece.
The foundation of intellectual humility. I know that I know nothing.
Right, because you can't learn anything if your cup is already full.
Yeah.
And then you have Plato warning us about mistaking shadows on a cave wall for reality.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, is the most perfect prediction of modern social media filters I've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely. Taking distorted sensory data and treating it as absolute truth. But if we move over to, say, ancient India, You have Jainism.
And they tackle that exact same bug, right?
Yes, through a concept called anekantavada, which is the multifaceted nature of reality. They basically argue that assuming your single viewpoint is the absolute truth isn't just arrogant, it's a literal processing error. Reality is too complex for one perspective.
It's just incredible. And then you look at Aristotle. He comes in and says, excellence isn't something you're born with. It's a habit you practice.
And Stoicism builds on that by focusing on control. Drawing a harsh line between what you can control, your thoughts, your choices, and what you can't, like the weather or traffic.
Or what other people think of you.
Yeah.
And Buddhism chimes in with the idea that suffering just comes from clinging to things.
Right, because we expect dynamic, changing things like our youth or our success to remain static. We try to freeze the universe.
And Taoism is like, stop fighting the current, flow with reality. Water defeats rock by yielding to it.
We also see Confucianism prioritizing character long before achievement, and Vedanta philosophy teaching that you are the underlying awareness like the sky that remains totally untouched by passing storms.
Man, and then existentialism just caps it all off with this terrifying but beautiful freedom that you have to create your own meaning. Life is a blank slate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is truly astounding. Know yourself, accept change, practice virtue. The texts use this beautiful metaphor. It's as if humanity kept discovering the exact same mountain, just starting from different sides.
Okay, but I have to ask, because this is the thing that always trips me up. Is this mountain of truth just poetic, nice-sounding philosophy, or is there actual hard evidence behind it? What does this all mean for our actual brains?
That is the best part. Modern neuroscience entirely validates these ancient texts. It is literally hardwired biology.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, we have this process called neuroplasticity. The basic rule in neuroscience is that neurons that fire together wire together.
Oh, right. Neural adaptation.
Exactly. So think about how the brain creates habits. Every time you complain about a minor inconvenience, you are firing a specific neural pathway.
Your brain is just trying to be efficient, right?
Yes. It wants to save processing power. So it adds a little more myelin to that pathway, making that complaint signal travel a lot faster the next time.
So wait, the more you complain, the easier complaining becomes. You're literally widening the dirt road in your brain for negativity.
You are paving a superhighway for misery. But conversely, the more you practice gratitude, the easier gratitude becomes.
That is mind-blowing. So what the ancient philosophers called building character or virtue
is what modern science simply calls neural adaptation.
It's the exact same insight, just a different vocabulary.
Precisely. But this also explains why changing your philosophy is so physically exhausting. If you've spent 20 years reacting to stress with panic, your brain has a paved highway for panic.
And trying to react calmly means you have to hack a completely new path through a dense jungle.
It physically burns more glucose. It literally hurts to think differently at first.
Which brings us to the core problem today. Because if history and science both agree on how to build a better mind, why do we almost never think deeply?
Because the jungle path is hard and scrolling is effortless.
Yeah, the source material has this analogy of a muddy lake that I just love. If you constantly stir a muddy lake with entertainment and notifications and, cheap dopamine, it never becomes clear.
Silence is required for the mud to settle.
But silence is deeply uncomfortable. When you sit in silence, you have to face the bugs in your own code. So we just keep the lake stirred up.
Which is why the texts offer a very specific 5-step practical framework to actually clear the mud and debug the system.
Okay, let's walk through these. What's step one?
Step one, pause. You have to find that tiny window of freedom between a stimulus and your response.
So before you fire off an angry text, just breathe.
Exactly. Because step two is ask better questions. The default human reaction is to ask, why is this happening to me?
Which just makes you a victim.
Right. You have to change that to, what can this teach me? Or what is my next optimal move?
Which shifts you into being an active problem solver. Okay, step 3. And this is the one I struggle with the most, honestly.
Most people do. Step 3. Separate facts from stories.
Yes. Okay, fact. Someone criticized your work in a meeting? That's just raw audio data.
But the story your brain spins is, my career's over, everyone thinks I'm a fraud, my life is ruined.
And your body reacts to the story. Your heart races, you start sweating. The story causes all the suffering, not the fact itself.
Exactly. You have to strip away the narrative, which leads to step 4. Practice one virtue daily. Tiny actions build identity.
Right, you don't just magically become a patient person. You have to, like, purposely pick the longest line at the grocery store.
And practice keeping your heart rate down while you wait.
Put in the reps. Okay, and step 5.
Step 5 is evening reflection, taking just 5 minutes before sleep to ask yourself, what went well today? Where did I react unconsciously? And what will I improve tomorrow?
It's like running a daily diagnostic scan on your operating system.
And if you do that every day, the compounding effects are life-changing.
You know, it reminds me of this really funny but profound analogy from the sources about arguing with a GPS.
Oh, the navigation app analogy.
Yeah. Like, imagine you miss your exit on the highway and you just start screaming at your GPS. That's so unfair. The sign was hidden. I'm going to be late.
And the GPS doesn't argue with you?
Not at all. It doesn't get defensive. It just calmly says, recalculating.
It just updates the map based on the new reality.
Exactly. And reality doesn't argue either. It doesn't care if you think it's unfair. The wisest person is just the one who stops yelling at the dashboard and starts recalculating.
Because at the end of the day, philosophy is not some luxury for intellectuals in ivy-covered buildings. It is basic maintenance for the human mind. It teaches us how to live well and clearly in a world that is constantly changing.
Which leaves us with this final, honestly kind of chilling realization to think about. You are already following a philosophy right now, whether you know it or not.
Every choice you make is an expression of it.
Yep. And if you don't consciously sit down and choose your philosophy, I promise you someone else is going to choose it for you.
The culture will program you by default.
Oh, absolutely. Advertising agencies will program you to feel inadequate, so you buy more stuff. Algorithms will write your code to keep you perpetually outraged, just so you keep clicking.
You're outsourcing the operating system of your mind to the highest bidder.
Exactly. So here's a thought I really want you to mull over as you go about your day. We always talk about societal change happening out there in politics and technology in the economy. But what if the next major leap in human evolution isn't technological at all?
That's a fascinating question.
Right. What if the ultimate rebellion right now, today, isn't about protesting or dropping off the grid? What if the most radical, rebellious thing a human being can do in the digital age is simply to sit in a quiet room, clear the mud, and consciously choose the code that runs their own mind? Take back control of your operating system. Because if you don't, the algorithm will.